We are so here, and especially today, Veterans Day, as we honor those who have served in the armed forces of our country. We thank all veterans for serving our nation and the people of our country with honor and distinction. We are proud and grateful for all you did, and we thank you. I'm wondering if we have some veterans here today. There, it's on.
Oh, much better.
Before we get started, a few housekeeping items for our virtual attendees. The Zoom audience members are all on mute. And if you have any issues during the presentation or would like to submit a question for Rona, please use the chat function. We'll have a Q&A session at the end, and we'll present any questions to Rona at that time. Also, we recommend that you change your screen view on Zoom from gallery view to speaker view so that you see whoever is speaking rather than all the other Zoomers. Atlanta Authors has been holding author events at the Roswell Library, the Cultural Arts Center, and virtually for the last 15 years. And the list of authors, I think I'm standing in front of it, is impressive. We are excited to be meeting here at this new venue, and we appreciate your attendance. I want to thank David Crow and the Cultural Arts staff for all the work they do to bring the arts to our community. And I want to thank the Atlanta Authors Committee members, which include myself, Deanna Smith, Marilyn Barron, Diane Stevenson, Kathy Chaffee, George Weinstein, who is with the Atlanta Writers Club, Judy Stanton, and the owner of our favorite local bookstore, the book miser herself, Annelle Gerson. We couldn't hold these author events without the unwavering support of the Friends of the Roswell Library and the Friends of the East Roswell Library, and we thank them as well. In addition, we work in association with Roswell Reads. That group has kept their program alive and growing for more than 17 years. Signed copies of Rona's books will be available for purchase in the lobby or at Book Miser. Book Miser is located at 3822 Roswell Road in East Cobb, less than a 10-minute drive from most areas of Roswell. Those of you on Zoom can go to their website at bookmiser.net for more information. Plus, we've added their information to the chat area of the screen. And now I would like to invite Annelle Gerson up to introduce our author, Rona Simmons.
Thank you, Lou. And again, thank you all of you for being here today and for the privilege of your time. I am honored to introduce our speaker today, Rona Simmons. She's an author and truly a literary philanthropist, known in the Atlanta writing community as someone who does everything with excellence. After a long and successful career with IBM, Rona retired and began her writing journey. Since 2016, she has written 7 books in the genres of suspense, historical fiction, and nonfiction, her new true love. Her stories, articles, and interviews have been published in literary journals, online magazines, and newspapers. When not writing and diligently researching, she tours the country, lecturing on World War II and sharing veteran stories. She blogs, edits, markets, and donates generously of her time to volunteer groups, including the Georgia Council for the Arts, the Atlanta Chamber of Commerce's Arts and Business Council, the Gilmer Council for the Arts, the Milton and Dahlonega Literary Festivals, and the very special organization which she will share with you this afternoon. In honor of Veterans Day, we do celebrate Rona's Veterans Books, a gathering of men, which Patty Callahan Henry calls a vehicle of time travel, taking us back to the senses and places of 1940s North Carolina and the battles of World War II. Vivid, beautiful, and heartbreaking. The other veterans of World War II, Stories from Behind the Lines, was the winner of the Military Writers Society of America Gold Medal Award. And finally, Images of World War II, The Art of Jack Smith, a book with a remarkable origin and a veteran story worth remembering. Ladies and gentlemen, Rona Simmons.
Thank you everyone for coming, and especially our veterans. And since there are a few people that came in late, again, if anyone who is a veteran of any of our conflicts or even in peacetime, thankfully, please raise your hand so I can raise them high. Be proud of that. Thank you. That's why we're here today. Earlier, I sent an email out and I told everyone, I know it's raining, but don't let a little rain stand in your way. Think of what the veterans stood through during their service. So thank you again, everyone, for attending. I am going to, and those of you online, sorry I can't see you, but I think you can see me. So we are going to talk about the World War II mostly, but not so much about the war, because I think rather than reading about battles that you could read in almost any history book and maybe remember from your high school days, we're going to talk about the people in the war, because that's my favorite part, and what the people did in their time of service. And I'm going to single out mostly 4 particular stories, but and we'll look at their faces, their stories, and how they ended up in my books, and why I do this. So you might say, well, why does this woman write about World War II? I'm not probably your typical historian that you think of as writing World War II books. So a little introduction. Up here in the top left are my 2 grandfathers who served in World War I. And below them in black and white is my father with his P-38 fighter plane. He was a fighter pilot out of North Africa and flew bomber escorts into Europe when they were bombing during the war, early stages of the war. Down here at the bottom left is my father-in-law's crew. Sorry, this is going in and out, but who was a crew in a B-17 fighter group out of England, bombers who bombed from England, left the southeastern England, went into Germany, France, Austria. And then up at the top right, my mother, who was in the era when there were Rosie the Riveters, and I think probably most people know who Rosie the Riveters were. She was way too vain to put on overalls and go work in the factory. But she did model the 100,000th artillery shell made by a company in her hometown of Evansville, Indiana. So that's her contribution to the war. Everybody did something. That dashing young man in white Navy dress uniform is my husband. So he was Navy, and his claim to fame are those 2 helicopters. As you see, one of those was his helicopter. Now, he was in a war as well. I call it the invasion of the moon. Now, most probably don't know what the invasion of the moon was. Anyone care to guess? Well, that's when we sent men up to the moon, and they invaded. They landed on the shores of some crater. Well, they had to come back, and the Navy helicopters went out to rescue the capsule when it came down into the ocean. So that was his war. That's when he was on one of their helicopters. Down at the bottom left is my brother-in-law, who was a Marine, and my nephew, who was in the Iraq War. So I come by it honestly. Let me try to switch here. There, is that better? Maybe. Hopefully that we won't get the ocean in here again. But, so I guess I inherited my interest in World War II. So, how I got started, as Anil mentioned, and it's very hard to live up to Anil's introductions, every time I go, "Did I did that? I can't remember. But, I was doing a book signing over in Ackworth Military Bookstore. Some of you may know that bookstore, sorry, Anil. And, the gentleman sat down beside me, he was in his nineties, and he started telling me stories. I was there. And, I got up at one point and I walked through the bookstore and I saw these paintings on the wall. And I noticed the signature. It said Jack Smith. And that was the name of the gentleman that was sitting beside me and been talking to me for 2 hours. I think I'm gonna search. So, I said, "Jack, is that you?" And he says, "Yes." He was a Navy veteran, he's in the Pacific. And after he, came back, he became a commercial artist here in Atlanta and began a decade or so after the war. He had collected all these newspaper articles, pictures of famous events during World War II. And he started painting them. These are not pencil, these are not pen and ink, which is easy. These are paintings with black paint and a brush with about 2 or 3 hairs. No pencil drawings, no rulers. They are absolutely stunning, and this doesn't even give justice to them. So I was talking to him and I said, "Jack, now, he's 93 at the time." And I said, "Someday your paintings are going to be cast far and wide. You need to really put them in a book." Now, lesson learned. If you tell a 93-year-old person they should write a book, that's not going to happen unless you're going to do it. So I said, "Okay, Jack, I will, as long as I can be co-author," so it says Jack Smith with Rona Simmons, "and I can research the paintings, all 40 of them, and find out exactly where the story was, what battle occurred. And I did some research to find out where we could, the names of people who are in the paintings." So we did, and that became Images from World War II, The Art of Jack Smith. And unfortunately, he passed away about a year ago. But had been working with his daughter, and we agreed that we would donate his paintings, and he knew this, to the National Museum of the War in the Pacific in Texas. So they are there today, and hopefully they will have an exhibition of his paintings at one time. But they are now at least all together in the book in his own. So while I was talking to Jack, I had also met very shortly thereafter, as I was producing his book, another young lady whose father had served in World War II, and unfortunately he had passed, but his name was Pete Peterson. He was a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army. And Pete was in high school and in Texas, and he had, during the summers, worked as a baker at a local bakery. And he signed up to go into the Army. And he was, unlike many men, he didn't have a preference as what he wanted to do. He just said, I want to serve my country. And so they assigned him to the Quartermaster Corps. Now, some of you know who the Quartermaster Corps is. I didn't at the time. And they do things like get the uniforms to the soldiers. If they have eyeglasses and have to have a new set of eyeglasses or whatever. They had a bakery. And he said, "Oh, that's why I'm being assigned." No, he was assigned to the Graves Registration Unit. Now, I didn't know what the Graves Registration Unit was. I have come a long way. I know a lot more about World War II now than I did then. So he worked behind the lines. And what his unit was responsible for was when a battle was coming up, and the war operated a little differently than you might see on TV screens today. Patton, and because they all have talked to World War II veterans, and they've got a Patton story or an Eisenhower story. And sometimes I believe them, sometimes I don't. But this one I believe. He was in Patton's unit, and Patton would say, "Tomorrow we're going to have a battle over there. And I want you to go ahead and get the graveyard ready." They knew there were going to be casualties, so they would start digging graves. But they had a restriction by Patton. That graveyard that you're going to go acquire the land from a local farmer, and begin the construction of the graves cannot be in sight of my men. He did not want his soldiers going to that battle and passing anywhere near a cemetery. And one time they had to actually go to the cemetery. So they began digging the graves, and then his people would go out and retrieve the bodies. Sometimes Americans, sometimes Germans, they buried both. But they had to identify those people, or what was left of them, by whatever means necessary. And be able to tag that person with their dog tags, with numbers and locations of where they were. It didn't sound too difficult until you realize they're going all over Europe. And this is just his unit in Europe. There were 350 cemeteries in Europe at the end of the war. There are now 29 American memorial cemeteries, like Normandy, like Henri Chapelle in France, like the Middle American Cemetery in the Philippines. 29 of them worldwide. Many of the families asked for their remains of their soldiers to come back at the end of the war. And so they had to go find that particular soldier and know where he was in one of those 350 cemeteries and send the remains home. The rest, then the families also wanted to leave them where they were in one of the cemeteries that we know today, which are beautifully maintained. And I hope if you haven't ever visited one, you should. So without the meticulous record keeping of MA's men and the horrific job, 24 hours a day, day after day, they had to be able to.
Just 1 minute, I'm sorry. I
Certainly.
think that people would have to turn it up. You wanna
Yeah,
say, can you
switch.
project without the mic, you think?
I can try. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I better, all right, we'll do that. I can shout. My husband will say you can hear me down the block, so I ought to be able to. So, they were very meticulous, and as you can imagine, it was a horrific duty. Picking up remains, which they're, we think a body, well, it wasn't always a body. And what they then had to do, what the Army recognized how difficult this was for this type of assignment. They gave them unlimited cigarettes. And that was a good thing back then. Sorry for the non-smokers in today's words. They got that and they were very appreciative of it. So, as I said, he also amazingly took a camera with him to the war. And he has a number of photographs of all the famous places he went during the war. And you think, well, what was he doing? And he gets stopped by the cops or the border people, and they'd say, well, what are you doing? And he'd say, oh, we're looking for bodies. And he always carried a little cart behind the car or whatever he was doing it like this. So he had an excuse, but he did have a pretty good tour of Europe. And he was also in what I'll say is little, an event called Little Pearl Harbor. And I'll bet you no one here knows what Little Pearl Harbor was, right? Those are some of the wonderful things I learned in the research. And it almost, I would rather research than write. I mean, I could just dig for days. But Little Pearl Harbor was a catastrophe. And Pete was involved in it. We had some ships, merchant marine ships, cargo ships, delivering cargo for the war to Italy. This was late in the war, so they had all pulled, a dozen ships in the harbor, and they were unloading their cargo. Known to only 2 people, the captain of the ship and one other person on one of the ships, were chemical weapons. And so we think of ourselves as we're not going to use chemical weapons. Well, Eisenhower, of course, knew it, and Roosevelt. And what they said was, we won't be the first to use them. But if Germany begins using chemical weapons, we will use them. And so they had loaded this entire ship with a cargo of chemical weapons. At just the moment, a German fighter bomber flies over Bari in Italy, B-A-R-I, and sees all these people unloading cargo, and nobody seeming to care about the fact that he's over this harbor. So he makes a circle, comes back, drops a bomb, and ignites chemical weapons. Thousands were killed. And Pete attended to some of them and helped bury some of them. So fascinating things that men, and I say men because, quite frankly, in World War II, granted there were women serving mostly in the Waves or the Army Nurse Corps, some of whom were shot and killed, but very few
these men were out there doing and volunteering to do that work. So after I had produced, this thought was rolling around in my head about Pete, and all of the people, I said, if I didn't know anything about that, think of all the other jobs that are out there that you don't know about. So about that time, I met Frank Cox, and Frank Cox is a local veteran of the Vietnam War. He is, I say, and he only has a few medals on there. He is a Marine's Marine. This man is the real thing. And he wrote a book called Lullabies for Lieutenants that is very frank about what they did in Vietnam. He was a forward observer, and in his book, I read it about the same time, he wrote, as an air-ground liaison officer, we would avoid the messy job of being in or attached to the infantry. It also would be more exciting than the mundane option, motor transport officer, or worst of all, an embarrassment in front of your peers, a supply officer. And I read that and I said, Frank Cox, how rude. And so that sounded like a challenge. And I had just met Pete Peterson with Braves Registration. So I said, I'm going to prove you wrong. So I interviewed 20 veterans from across the country. People, when I told people I was doing this, a veterans group I belonged to said, oh, Rona, you got to talk to so-and-so. And there's a North Georgia veterans group, I say, who went 50 miles from their home up in Big Canoe, and they dragged every veteran they could find. There were some fascinating stories. I'm not going to go into these. You have to read the book. The other veterans of World War II. There were 20 of them, and there were people like William Scott, who was a black son of the black daily newspaper here in Atlanta back at that time. He eventually became president of that organization. But he went to war. He was a photographer for Morehouse College sports team. And when he got over, he was in the Army, and one day during his service, and he has an Eisenhower story, of course, and he said Eisenhower told his group, go get in your Jeep and go down to Buchenwald. Now that would be like saying, get your Jeep and go down to Marietta. It didn't mean anything. It was just a town. He said, what am I supposed to do? He said, just get in your Jeep and go down there. Well, of course, he had his camera, and he saw the concentration camp, and he was taking photographs. And he took a couple dozen, and he said, I put my camera down. I could not take any more pictures. And in fact, those pictures are in the Holocaust Museum today. So thankfully he did take pictures. The thing about why Eisenhower sent William Scott and his team, anybody's guess? They were black. And when they got to Buchenwald, or any concentration camp, the prisoners had been tricked before. The Germans would say, they would come in plain clothes or civilian clothes or whatever, and say, oh, you're free, you're all free. And they would begin walking out and they would shoot them, kill them. So he knew, if I send a platoon of black soldiers, they're going to know they're not Germans dressing up. So that was, in fact, why it happened, and it was successful. Then there was Frank Cohn, who was a native of Texas. He was one of the last cavalry-mounted battle soldiers. Had his doctor's bag with him on his horse. Now, they didn't let them take their horses, the ones they were using in the U.S. when they went to the Philippines. But he was down there, and he was a battle surgeon. He was horse-mounted and one of the last men in those battles. He was captured and was on the Bataan Death March and died in Camp Cadet. And then Lewis Thompson, who was from Canton, where he lived before he died, was in the Army, and he did the very wrong thing. When they came through the camp, he had been digging the Lido Road, picks and shovels, knee-deep in mud, leeches, monkeys, he said everything. And the officer came in and said, I need some volunteers. Well, you know you're not supposed to volunteer. But he said, anything is going to be better than this. And he raised his hand and found himself as a kicker. Anyone know what a kicker is? I didn't at the time. I learned. He flew 1,000 combat missions over enemy territory in the back of a C-47 cargo plane with the doors open and kicked out the supplies to the men on the ground. They sent them medical supplies, ammunition, food, egg cartons, if you can believe that. That didn't break by the time they hit the ground. They had little parachutes on. But he endured 1,000 combat missions. And when Governor Kemp was inaugurated, they made a call out to people who were looking for veterans who from World War II that they wanted to honor. And I nominated Lewis. He was one of the most highly decorated, as he told me. I forgot the exact word, something like I was a buck private, and he was, and he did this and endured those missions, highly decorated, and he led the Pledge of Allegiance for Governor Kemp, and he was mine at the time. It's just a wonderful moment. So those stories became the other veterans of World War II. They're all different people, all service branches, all theaters of war. I was very lucky in the 20 I found, they had all completely different stories. And I talked to Frank again, and I actually had him review the book. It was written on the back. He did blurb or endorsed my book. And he said, I saw a lot of combat and rarely thought about those in the rear who assisted us. In fact, we doing the actual fighting derisively alluded to those in the rear as weaklings. But Simmons has changed my mind. So Frank and I are good friends today, and actually he's got a new book coming out. We'll talk to him shortly about it. But what keeps me going and doing this is probably one thing. It is this woman, Joyce Maddox, who is a Georgian, who when I met her, she was, I think, 97. She had complete Alzheimer's. She worked on the Manhattan Project. Now, she wasn't stirring the uranium, nothing sexy like that, but she had an equally important job. And her son, luckily, had videotaped her story a decade earlier. So he lent me the tapes and all of her records. And when I went back to give her the book, each one of these veterans has a little picture of themselves. That was the smile on her face. And all I have to do to say, oh, what am I going to do next? Is pull that picture out and say, it's going to be another World War II story. I know it. And she recognized her picture. That's about it. But if you talk to Joyce, you'd say, well, now, Joyce, what did you do in the war? And she'd go, she knew she'd been told never to talk about her experience. And by God, she wasn't going to do it then either. Not that I know that she would remember anything. But that became this book and kept me going on to the next. So I was hooked about this time, and I said, I don't have to go interview 20 strangers. I can just go to my father-in-law up there in the top right. He was that B-17 bomber I spoke about earlier and flying from England, Southeast England. Well, he had been deceased. He died when he was 46, back in the 60s. He had come home from the war. My husband, of course, knew him, but he never spoke about the war, like many veterans don't. And so he had very little. And unfortunately, my husband's mother remarried. And what does the new husband do? He goes up in the attic and throws everything out. We had nothing. He was also one of the men whose records were in the Veterans Administration office in St. Louis. Now, I don't know if any of you know, there is something like 75%, some huge percentage of the veterans in the war from the World War II through like the 60s. There was a fire in 1973 in St. Louis at the Veterans Administration. Those records are gone. These people tried to save them. They took charred pieces and captured whatever they could to try to help people like me who are now researching those. So we said, well, let's see what we can find out about him, because we knew that he did not finish his tour, which is not all that common. And if you know, when the bomber pilots went over to England, they were told at the early stages of the war, you have 25 missions before you can come home. Now you think, well, hey, I can knock that out by the end of the month, right? Well, no. It took about a year, 9 months to a year to get 25 missions in. Because your plane might be broken, it might be shot up, they had to repair it, you were sick, the weather was bad, missions were canceled. So it took quite a long time to actually get that done. And of course, the intelligence about where it actually gone. So let's say you're over there, you're one of these pilots, and you've got 25 missions ahead of you, and you're on number 23, and you say, man, 2 more and I'm home. Get your 24th one done, get your 25th one done, and Washington writes a little note. Sorry, you've got to do 30 missions. So you say, okay, and you get to 28, and you get to 29, and guess what? Washington says you have to do 35. So along that way, he was flying his missions, and this is southeastern England, and he flew all over. I mean, they did bombings in France and Austria, and not Switzerland, but Poland, Germany, all over. And some of these were just horrific missions. These are 9-hour trips in a freezing cold. Can't take your gloves off, can't take your mask off, can't do anything else for 9 hours, and into enemy territory, anti-aircraft fire, bombers, fighters. So on his 21st mission was over here, way deep into Germany, and he had dropped his bombs, and he was on his way out, and their plane got shot up very badly. And when they dropped the bombs, the bomb bay doors open. Everybody's seen that in the movies, right? The bottom of the plane opens up, and this frigid cold air comes wafting through. And they're flying away, making their sweep back to go back to Britain. And they notice the bomb bay doors don't close. And that's not supposed to happen. The guy down there by the doors is supposed to crank this wheel and get the bomb bay doors to close. Lieutenant Mackenzie had been shot up as part when the plane was hit. His arms were just covered with artillery shells, shrapnel. So he couldn't do anything, and they called for a couple of the men in the back to go down to where the bomb bay doors, and they got them closed. Harry Mattei, my husband's father, was at the controls of this plane. It was his 21st mission. He knew what was going on down there. They would talk on the radios. And he dropped the plane down as low as he could go so that they would be in calmer weather or warmer weather, and they could operate, because these guys were trying to bandage him up, and they had to do that without their gloves. And so he did save this gentleman's life. He landed the plane and never went up again. Now, I usually go on with that story, but I have one person who's reading the book right now. So I can't tell you what happened, and you all will have to read the book too. That became a gathering of men. And because we didn't know, and there were no records, we started talking, thinking, well, maybe we can find some of his group. And so this was in the early days of the internet and Google. Yes, I go back that far. And I said, well, we did have his crew list. And I said, well, give me a name. Let's just pray it's not John Smith, which thankfully it wasn't. They had very unique names. And we just started looking up where Joe Lobotnik lives, and in Ohio, and just dialing all the Lobotniks till we found the guy. And we found 2 living crewmen and the widow of one of the crewmen. And so my husband and I would get on the phone, and we talk a little bit about their experience, and they all remembered Harry. And we finally get around to what the question we really wanted was, what happened on that last flight? And the first serviceman said, oh, he went home early. I know that. So we said, well, we kind of went around the circle and came back again and said, well, do you remember what happened on that flight? He went home early. So we realized we weren't getting anywhere. Called the next guy. Got around to the story. Same thing. He went home early. Oh yeah, Harry didn't like it. He went home early. So, and of course the widow that was still living didn't know either. And my husband was very disappointed. I was very fortunate to have my father told. He was 97. And so I knew his story, which of course he said was not worth writing. But and so we said, well, he
my husband was so disappointed not to get to the facts. And I said, no, you don't understand. You have a better story than if they had said anything. Those men honored his memory. What did it matter? What exactly happened? Why he would not get in a plane again? And I was so proud of them. I call them his band of brothers. And if everybody thinks that Tom Hanks or Steven Spielberg coined the phrase band of brothers, that's not true. It's Shakespeare. So, but they are, and they're, these Navy Air Force, and that was about, in Tom Hanks movie that was on, these guys are a band of brothers. And that's why I wrote A Gathering of Men. I had to fictionalize it because we don't know, I've changed the names. But as you'll find out, everyone in the book is named for one of the crewmen who was in their actual names in England, except for the main characters. So I also, that also won a gold medal from the Military Writers Society of America. So I'm very proud of that. Now, you'd say, okay, what's next? And of course, I take Joyce's picture out, and I know I'm going to do another World War II story, and I have. This one is in process with the publisher now. It probably won't be here till late next year. Again, it's about the people. And these are, I took a moment in time of World War II, and I talk about what happened around the world with these different people, all different experiences. This one is Gervis Halton. He was a Marine Corps Corsair pilot, say Corsair right there, and he was in the Pacific. And he was defending or strafing the enemy that was on the island of Peleliu, which is one of the famous battles, which is right here. This is the Philippines, the Guinea, and down here's Australia. Peleliu is a tiny dot. You can't even see it on the map if you're looking. Well, the Marine Corps also, they said, there's another island down there, Yap Island, which is this other little dot, even tinier than Peleliu. And we need you to go fly down there and see, we bombed the airstrip that the Japanese have on Yap Island. And we want to make sure it's out of commission. So as we start flying in that area, we don't want to be attacked by anybody that might take off from that. So he and another guy flew down here. He had 2 people on his plane. And they flew down here and went over the airfield. The airfield was shot up. There were craters. There was no way they were going to get taken off from there. But there were some planes that they were repairing alongside the runway. And they said, well, we might as well go ahead and give them some more repair work to do, and we'll shoot them up and put those out of commission. So they did. He made another pass, came in low, 600 feet, and the artillery shot him down. He crashed at the end of the runway. That was not the end of the story. That's all I knew and all I could find in the records, until, through the magic of the internet again, this picture at the bottom right is a gentleman who I met online, never met him in person, found him on a website or Facebook. He has been searching, his name is Pat Ranfranz. He has been searching for his uncle's plane who crashed in the same time frame, I don't know if it's on Yap Island, but near there. So he's been going around to these islands looking for his uncle's plane. He found Gervis Halton's grave. The people of Yap Island, who were friendly to us, but they had been controlled by the Japanese, got his body, buried it near the end of the runway, near the end of the jungle, and until the 60s or 70s when Pat found his grave, they had tended that grave, put flowers on it, and kept the jungle from covering it. So they knew exactly what it was. His remains were dug up and returned to his descendants here later. Again, the stories you can't make up, and you just get a name and follow that, and it's just such a wonderful experience. That'll be in my new book, which I haven't named, but there are dozens of stories in there, all of them fascinating, wonderful details. I don't have a name yet. As one of the things I'm going to do, I will have the email list of the people here today. My publisher, they ask me what I want to name the book, and I have a sort of temporary name, but I also like to get feedback. What would you want to call it? And so when we get closer, I will email anybody here who wants to know a little bit more about it and help me name the book. So
that's a great number, you know, I'm one person, however many stories are in these few books. There are so many more stories to be told. I belong to a group that's called Stories Behind the Stars. And some people know what a gold star is. It's different today than it was back in World War II. If you had a person in your immediate family who was killed in the war, you received a gold star. This is a lady, I think she's from Louisiana. She has 4 gold stars in her window on the porch. 4 members of her family killed. Stories Behind the Stars is an all-volunteer group who are researching all 400,000 deceased servicemen, Americans from World War II. There are 150 volunteers from all over the country. Yes, that's me. I'm a few years younger, but that's me, and just people from everywhere, Colorado, from France, from Alabama, Alaska. We just do this because we're interested in it. And what we do is we are trying to see that all 400,000, mostly men, some women, have more than just a name on a tombstone, whether in one of our American memorial cemeteries or somewhere in, Ludwig, Georgia. We don't want them to just have name, date, and maybe their unit of service. So we have a number of research tools, and we do the research, we find out where their unit was, if we can find out more about them, what medals they got, who they served with. We write these up, they go into a database that's online called togetherweserve.com. And it's an enormous task, but we break it into smaller groups. We've done, this gentleman who started it from Utah did 2,000 himself. We then went to D-Day. We've written up everyone who fell during D-Day, which was a couple thousand, 2,500. We did everybody who was at Pearl Harbor, and we've done everybody in Arlington National. So we're moving through these. Sometimes I don't like to do that. I want to do my own thing. So I did one person from every state in the union. And then I said, I'll do one person from every county in Georgia. This was easy. There are 150, more or less, counties in Georgia. So I've gotten to about 80, about half of them. So I'm making my way. But there are just incredible stories that you learn because you get one name and you fight and you dig and you dig because getting the picture of it is just, when you have a picture, it's almost all that matters. But you learn incredible things. Slapton Sands. Anybody ever heard of Slapton Sands? But everybody in here has heard of D-Day, right? Slapton Sands is a beach in England on a little island off shores of England. It was the preparation for D-Day. It was a dress rehearsal. 700 men killed. They sent them out on the same boats that they were going to approach Normandy in. They're all dressed up. They got their rifles. They got their radios. I don't know how many boats there were enough to carry 700 men. They say absolute radio silence. No one breaks radio silence. So they're storming this. They're coming into this beach. And a little German submarine is patrolling over there. He goes, what is going on? How lucky I am. And he sank the first one, and they thought it was part of the game. They did not break radio silence until several of the boats were sunk. 749 men were killed in the exercise. Kept it secret for 30 years. They did not tell the men, this is April 44th, 2 months before D-Day. They did not tell the men that were going in for D-Day, or their families, or the newspapers what happened. Because they were afraid those people would say, well, this doesn't look like what I thought it might be. Again, I don't care what name you pick up, you find a story like that. So volunteers are needed. All you need is a computer. We give you free all of the tools, Ancestry Institution, Find a Grave, all of the things you need in order to help research. If anyone here is interested, it takes about an hour or two to actually look one of these up and do the research, unless you're like me and you, oh, wow, look at this. And then you're days later. They're so interesting, you could do one in 1 or 2 hours, it just depends. Sometimes there's nothing to be found, but maybe a birthday, maybe where they were from. et cetera. But it is, it's just, to me, incredibly rewarding. So, that's all I had, except if you saw my note today, for anyone who is online or here present, actually, I don't need these. As I said, I do these, they can be suitable for framing. I am offering to anyone here a couple hours of my time to research a veteran of your choice. Ideally World War II, so you might be a grandfather, or actually some other gray-haired people like me, it might be a father, could be a mother, could be a cousin, anything. If you have somebody from World War II that felt, whether they died in World War II or died later, I will do this research for you at no cost. Now, it won't happen tomorrow, but I think there are some 30, 40 people here and another 20, 30 online. So if you are interested, I will get the emails that you signed, a copy of the email sheet you signed today. I will contact you, or you can contact me. I think there's my email is in the chat for those of you who are online. If you're impatient, you want to know more, or you have any questions, please feel free to email me, and we'll go from there. Give you some time to think about who that would be, and I just would be happy to do it for anyone and help. As I said, put a story behind the name. So if you have any questions, if you don't want to do, that's fine too. But if you will, if you do, I'm very happy to offer that for Veterans Day today. So with that, I'm happy to take questions. Yes.
So is there a
You want to know the end of the story? No.
No, I was getting there. I wanted to know if what the website is, or can we look up the ones that you've already researched?
Yes,
or-
they're it's called storiesbehindthestars.org. And if you can't find that, storiesbehindthestars.org, you can't find that, I think it might be on that slide a little earlier. It doesn't say it there. It will look like that, but Stories Behind the Stars. And if you can't find it, again, email me and I'll be happy to share it with you. There are thousands of stories out there, and the other site is togetherweserve.com. This one you don't need a membership for. Togetherweserve.com makes you sign up for a membership. It doesn't cost anything, but to be able to view the stories that are out there, you have to become a member. We were talking earlier about letters that you mentioned a number of having got to a gentleman who had all the letters from his father, uncles in World War II. And one of the people I interviewed gave me 200 letters he had in a box. They were all mixed up, and I said, I'm diligently opening up, putting them in order, and started reading through them, and which helped me tell the story of his father. But I'm halfway through, and this is an 18-year-old young man who is away from his fiancée for the first time in his life, and away from his parents, and he's in the South Pacific, and his eyes are getting opened. And he writes home to his fiancée about the things he's learning. And I'm reading now, it was G-rated, but I'm thinking, so I called Jack and said, Jack, have you ever actually read these letters? He had not. I was shocked. And the other thing that was interesting about them, they had developed this code before he left, and she had circled the letters on a certain paragraph in just a few of the letters. And they spelled out Calcutta, so she knew he was in India. And Perth, Australia, the first word of it, how she knew which letter, to do the circles on, I don't know. But that was very much against protocol because they were trying to keep secret where people were. But it is fascinating. So if you have letters, do not throw them away. Take them to someone, take them to a museum, send them to me. So any other questions? Anything at all?
I was just gonna make a comment. When you talked about the kicker, it made me think of my father served in World War II. He was in the Army Air Corps and was a crew chief on a plane, which was basically just a mechanic, but he flew missions just with the other crew. And one of his jobs was to push the last parachutist out of the plane. Each one pushed the one before, and the last guy, my dad, would push it out and close
Close the door. There were probably a lot of young men who got up there and said, oh no, wait a minute. I don't think I'm buckled in or something. You needed a little encouragement for that, absolutely. The jobs were just very odd. There were 500 different job descriptions in the Army alone. So, you know, just don't think rifleman, there were bakers, there were, I mean, you name it. There was a job for that. There was a saddle makers, and then another one, bridle, something to do with bridles. And so, because we had horse-mounted troops, and we think, oh, that must have been the Civil War, that must have been, you know, the American Revolution. No, we had horse-mounted troops, so we need saddle makers. I've never met one. Anybody knows a saddle maker? I want to talk to them. Okay, yes, one more.
I know the numbers are dwindling, but how many living deaths do we have in the United States today?
When I started, which was 2011 or 12, there were 1,000,007. There are less than 150,000 today.
No way.
And if you project, they say 2030, there will be no more. So, and even that would be somebody who was 15 and lied about his age when he went in, but yeah, there were those people too.
Wasn't there like one left from Pearl Harbor?
Yeah, there's almost, you talk about D-Day, some of the big battles, there are almost no one, very few left. So please also, if you are a veteran or you know a veteran, there is the Veterans History Project. Does anyone know about that? Veterans History Project is there are groups in every state in the union, some of the libraries, some of the universities, Library of Congress. Atlanta History Center runs one here, but they do it at University of Georgia as well. They will interview your veteran. They will come to wherever you are at no cost and do a videotape of their experiences. And thank goodness for that, because as you say, the first-hand accounts are so rare and becoming rarer that it helps people like me tell their story years and years later. There are thousands of these out there, but I'm going to say 10, 15, 20,000. And so if there is a living World War II veteran, please. And they will do all wars, men, women, they don't care, but combat, non-combat. Yes, sir.
I did that once.
Wonderful.
And it is very professional.
Yes.
They had 3 people who were historians. I can't remember the lady's name who organized it, but it's really it's wonderful,
yeah,
because they bring out things that you hadn't thought about it because you hadn't thought about those.
Right.
It's a really nice project.
And they are online. Anybody can go watch those. Oftentimes there's a gentleman who was the World War II veteran and his wife, and when the question says, now where were you in, them from New York, where did you go? And his wife answers. I know better than the man, I got the memory still. But yes, they are fascinating. It's fascinating to me. Okay. Thank you very much.
And that was so interesting. It's very, very appropriate today. Just some upcoming events. Atlanta Authors' next event will be.
Lou, hold on. You want?
Pardon?
She's just getting to the slide.
Oh. Okay, this is Dot Paget. She's written a book. She's part of the Peanut Brigade when Jimmy Carter was elected. She has a memoir of the time, and it's called Jimmy Carter Elected President with Pocket Change and Peanuts. And that's January 27th. It will be at the Roswell Library. And then Roswell Reads has an online, a virtual book discussion of the Roswell Reads book, William Kent Kruger's The River We Remember. And that is Tuesday. If you want to sign up to participate in that book discussion, roswellreads.com, and you sign up for either 2 o'clock or 7 o'clock event, book discussion online. Thank you all so much for coming. This was really wonderful. It's perfect.
So
today.
informative. The books are available for purchase in the lobby. So you don't forget that part.
Yeah, and